Good morning from Bangkok. It is officially 8 o'clock here. I can hear the music playing in the park for the King's Anthem, so I know it's 8 a.m. in Bangkok. I'm just waiting to see who joins me here today. I hope you guys have time to chat about developing skills and habits for students to engage meaningfully and respectfully in online spaces. Super excited to talk about that with you guys this morning. This week we've given away two great freebies that I'm going to highlight in my conversation so that you can not only hear what we're thinking about and kind of have this conversation here today, but also you kind of have two digital resources that you can have a look at and use with your students. One of the things I want to do today too is not just talk about like teaching meaningful dialogue in online spaces, but also as an adult in the lives of the children you're with, how can you kind of help them build those skills? So kind of have two sections today, thinking about in the classroom and then thinking about just being an adult in the lives of teenagers and teens and younger learners that are trying to figure out how to navigate this digital world. That's a really big part of their lives. But maybe we're less familiar with as adults. So to kind of keep myself organized, hi Robin, thank you for joining. I made this little piece of paper here, and I know my handwriting is terrible, I'm very sorry. But these are kind of the two big focus areas that I want to talk about today is as a classroom teacher, what you can do to help your children understand how to engage meaningfully and respectfully in digital spaces, and then also as an adult, what you can do with the kids in your life as a parent or just as a teacher, as a human being, a mature, reasonable adult in the lives of teenagers that are learning how to behave in online spaces while they're physically in online spaces. So I'm going to kind of throw this up as I talk about the different elements of today's session. And like I said, I know my handwriting's not so great, and maybe this is kind of a low-tech solution to not being able to put captions up here yet, or not knowing how to put captions up here yet, but I wanted to structure this conversation a little bit because otherwise I might just ramble. Thank you, Chrissy, for sketchnoting. That is awesome. I'm super excited. I love when people sketchnote things that I say. It makes me sound smart and look smart. So I guess I'll kind of get started a little bit with the aspect of, as a teacher, what can you do to build that kind of common practice of engaging meaningfully and respectfully in conversations in online spaces, because we're so good at talking about those things in a face-to-face environment. We're so good at teaching kids to behave respectfully in the classroom, to be a good friend, to talk to each other in a nice and kind way, and when you share constructive criticism, to do it in a meaningful, respectful way. But when we kind of transition into online spaces, we don't always bring all of those skills with us, or we kind of expect students to know how to behave in those spaces because we know that those are spaces that they spend a lot of time in. And so we can kind of gloss over some of those skills in our classrooms, expecting kids to already be experts. And the bottom line is they're really not. So one of the things that we shared with our two freebies this week, and is actually my number one bullet number A there, is to practice. So my idea is to prioritize comments as conversation. So what can we do in the classroom to practice the skills of having a conversation in an online space so that we become kind of build habits of how to communicate through writing the way that we would communicate orally in our classroom. So there's a couple of strategies that we shared this week. One I think came from the PDF and one came from the blog, or maybe they both came from the PDF, I can't remember. But one of them is to start with a T-chart to determine the difference between what is a compliment versus what is a comment. And I think sometimes when kids are sharing their feedback in online spaces, they always go to great job, or, you know, I love what you wrote, or sounds great, or great idea. And they don't think about actually offering content. What could make this blog post? What could make this video? What could make this image or this infographic or whatever piece of work a student has produced? They don't always think about what could make that better. It's more just kind of a pat on the back. And everybody loves the pat on the back. We want to be able to give kids those pats on the back as well. But just having a conversation about what's the difference between a compliment and a comment could be a great starting point. And in the PDF, I know we talk about using a T-chart to think about those characteristics of the difference between a comment versus a compliment. So that's one conversation you can have with your kids, is building up that understanding of the difference between just a regular old compliment, which is wonderful and we love to have those, and a comment, which is meaningful and may offer some constructive criticism. The next step of that, and what I always do with my students whenever we're blogging in whatever format, is we talk about a comment sandwich. And I think I actually usually do a comment hamburger because, I don't know, it's fun. And so I draw on the board a hamburger with a big fluffy bun, round on the top and, rectangular on the bottom. And then I draw the meat and or veggies or whatever in the middle and sauce and all that kind of stuff. And we talk about what goes in the bun part is the nice stuff. It's the compliment stuff. It's the greeting. It's the hi, my name is Kim. I read your blog post. I love the way you started your paragraph with this descriptive description. And then the bottom part of the bun is kind of a sign off. Thank you so much. I hope you come and visit my blog. But what's really important is the comment part, that part in the middle. So your comment is sandwiched by two compliments, and that comment is that meaningful engagement where we're talking about the content of what was written in the post or presented in the video, the opportunity to give some constructive criticism. As teachers, basically, we're talking about writing a report card comment. You always kind of start with something positive about the student, then you get into the meat of what you really want to say, what's really important for the parents to hear about that child, and then you come back out again with something nice and complimentary to kind of sandwich what is the dense part of what you want to say with two really nice compliments. So, back to my little sheet here. When you're starting with that conversation about comments versus compliments, you can kind of ease into it by making that T-chart, helping kids understand the difference between a comment and a compliment, and then actually have them practice creating little comment hamburgers where they have compliments as the bun part and the deep comments as the meat or veggies on the inside of that sandwich. So to start with that conversation about comments versus compliments, those are two strategies you can use in your classroom today with your kids to help them see the difference between a compliment and a comment, and to see how to put those together into a nice sandwich that makes sense whenever you're giving feedback in online spaces. Taking that time to really kind of dissect the difference between a comment and a compliment and how to structure that seems so pedantic, I guess, when I'm explaining it now. But when I think about all the conversations I've had with kids, I think they get intimidated by sharing authentic feedback sometimes in digital spaces because it feels mean. So putting a structure onto it, that we're all doing this comment hamburger or comment sandwich or whatever you want to call it, helps kids prioritize the importance of a true, meaningful comment, even though it might be kind of scary at the start. So I've done that with all grade levels, but particularly middle school, that comment sandwich really is a nice way to talk about giving meaningful comments. So that's just kind of getting the conversation started on the difference between a compliment and a comment. My second little item here, and I'd love to hear what you guys think about that, by the way. If you think that's a good idea, let me know. If you think it's a terrible idea, let me know. If you've tried it and it worked, let me know. So second kind of idea is comment on shared reading within your classroom. That's 1B on this little piece of paper here that I'm trying to come nice and close with. And I think there's lots of strategies you can do to comment on shared reading within your classroom. I think one of the things that may be intimidating for teachers is to get straight out there into blogging space or into online spaces. You can actually build these skills just within your own classroom without having to be on any social media or doing anything beyond the four walls of your classroom. And one great way to do that, and this I know was mentioned in our blog post this week, is to read something collaboratively in a Google Doc. Thank you, Chrissy. I'm glad you think the structure is valuable. So reading something collaboratively in a Google Doc is an easy way to practice commenting, but in a totally safe, enclosed environment where you're just inside your classroom. So they can read the passage in Google Docs and leave comments, and they can do it asynchronously. It can be done for homework. It can be done, can set that up over different times of the day, however you want to do that. They can leave the comments in a Google Doc, or they can leave comments on a sticky note if you want to do it within your classroom. I like to think about reading in a Google Doc collaboratively over a number of levels. And this is something that I learned from Jeff, and I have done with him in our trainings for Eduro Learning with our Marysville and Everett teachers, and I love it, and I've now used it in lots of different places. And so the idea behind this is that commenting in a Google Doc can be just as stressful as commenting online. There's pressure, people are watching you, they can see your name. So how can you structure this commenting in a Google Doc to give kids practice in commenting in an enclosed and safe space, but not feel stressed out by how quickly they're commenting? So we do it for 3 levels. You can read silently alone, read silently together, or just read together. So I'm going to talk about those 3 right now. As a teacher, you can create a Google Doc and copy and paste text from anything in there, any content area that you want students to read. And you can ask them to read that document as a view-only document. And they're just going to read the document, and then you can do that practice of having kids make sticky notes about what they might say or have a conversation about the document, and that's just an opportunity for them to read in Google Docs and see what that's like. So that's just reading silently alone. We're reading a Google Doc, and then we have a conversation about it. Then we can ask students to read silently together, and you'll see how we're going to start to kind of build on this idea. So they're reading that view-only doc, but in this case, we can ask them to make a copy of that document and add comments to their own personal copy. So now nobody else can see the comments they're making as they're making them. There's no pressure, there's no observation of how fast one person is reading, or the thoughts that they're sharing are not influencing anyone else because they're making it on their own copy. And then after a set amount of time, maybe 10 minutes or however long you want to give them to read, depending on how long the passage is, you can ask them to bring their comments over to the shared Google Doc, which originally was view only, but now you've made it they can comment. And they can have a set amount of time, let's say 5 minutes, to copy and paste their comments over into this shared Google Doc. And then to teach the next level of that conversation piece, give them a chunk of time to reply to each other. So we've read it silently by ourselves. We've had a chance to think about it by ourselves and document our thinking in our own personal Google Doc, or maybe you did it on sticky notes, doesn't really matter. And now you bring it over to the shared Google Doc where everybody can comment and everyone's putting in their comments at about the same time. And then you're giving them a structured time to reply to each other. So maybe that's another 10 minutes to reply to each other. So there's reading silently alone, just reading the doc, making notes. You have your copy. You're doing it by yourself. There's reading silently together, which is you are looking at a shared document, but you're making your comments on a separate document and then bringing them over at a set time. You've done those 2. You're feeling confident. The third layer of that, I would say, is reading together. And the idea is that there's just that one Google Doc. You're not asking kids necessarily to make a copy unless they really want to. And they're commenting as they read. So now we're confident that we understand the format of how this works. We can comment as we're reading, we can see other comments as we're reading, and then we can set a time to reply to that, or we can allow students to reply as they're reading. So the idea behind this is you're kind of leveling up each time you do it. You're providing students that kind of safe space to read something and reflect on it on their own. Then you're giving them a structured format for reading and replying and sharing during kind of time frames, and then you're doing it more organically where they're able to read the document and comment and reply. So you can do all of that in one lesson if your kids are ready for that, and you can do it where you have the document that's open and there's all of the opportunity for kids to comment, so it's a comment doc, and you just set some structured time. So you say for the first 15 minutes we're going to read only. For the following 5 to 10 minutes, we're going to leave comments only. And the following 10 to 15 minutes, we're going to reply to comments. However you wanted to structure that, I think the most important part is then talking about what was that like, to read and reflect and share your thinking and then have other people reply to what you said. So I think a lot of times we ask students to comment on other students' work using Google Docs, but we very rarely prioritize the replying to comments. So start a conversation in the comments threads in a Google Doc. So you can do this all within the four walls of your own classroom. You don't have to be on any social media spaces, but you can build the skills for replying using that comments versus compliments and the comment sandwich in a Google Doc, where we're focusing on the conversation that's created through the comments and the replies, as opposed to just the comment, if that makes sense. Let me know what you think about that, and I'll just put my little notepad back up again. So I've talked about the importance of understanding the difference between a compliment and a comment, and two ways you can do that with the T-chart and a comment sandwich. That was 1A. And then we just talked about how we can comment on shared reading within your classroom using Google Docs. So you don't have to feel pressure to go online or be in social media spaces. You can do that just within the four walls of your classroom. And so that's commenting on shared readings in Google Docs. And then if you feel like you're super confident with all this stuff and you've got your conversation, you've had your conversation about comments versus compliments, you've practice doing this within your own classroom using Google Docs, using that structured reading times. Oh, hi, Peggy. I'm sorry you had trouble finding the live stream, but I'm so glad you're here. Thank you for joining us. Glad you found us. So we've got the conversation about comments versus compliments, and you've got the commenting on the shared reading using the Google Docs. And now you're kind of ready to go beyond the walls of your classroom. And there's lots of ways you can do that, of course. And when you're like really prepared and you want kids to be commenting and sharing with others and sharing their thinking in a respectful and meaningful way, you could start really simple. You don't even need your own blog. You can get started by using the Comments for Kids hashtag on Twitter. And I know that was in our PDF as well. So there are teachers who are blogging with their students all around the world, and they would love rich, meaningful, engaging conversations on their student blogs. I know Peggy is one of those people who would love to have comments on their student blogs, and I know Chrissy would too, and so would Robin. So if you search for Comments for Kids on Twitter, you will find lots of teachers who are sharing their kids' writing, looking for other kids to write back to them. So after you've had all that practice in your classroom about how to write a meaningful, engaging, and respectful comment, go and do it on actual kids' blogs who really want your feedback. Once you've got practice with that and kids are feeling really confident and they're engaging meaningfully and you're talking about the conversations they're having, you're reflecting on the value of sharing meaningful content in a comment, you can have your own teacher blog and have students comment there, or have your own students have their own blog and they can comment on each other's. And usually when I have students do comments, the first couple of times we'll develop a commenting rubric. And I will assess some of their comments. I'll ask them to choose, which comment would you like me to assess? Because I know sometimes they spend more time and sometimes they spend less, and it's fair enough for them to decide. I don't really want commenting to be like homework. But designing a commenting rubric so kids know what makes a good comment is a really great way for kids to understand the value of meaningful comments. And having kids comment on each other's blogs, like Peggy is saying, builds that authentic audience that makes the writing that they're sharing even more meaningful, because now they're getting that authentic feedback. So back to my paper here. So we've talked about the comments versus compliments. We've talked about a strategy using Google Docs to kind of build that practice of conversations, committing to conversations within the classroom walls. And now we're talking about kind of going beyond your classroom walls using Twitter and blogs, and just simply starting with that Comments for Kids hashtag and getting kids confident and comfortable with engaging in authentic conversations in online spaces will inspire them to want to write for themselves too. You can do this through your own classroom blog, or you can set up ePals, you can go through Skype. There are lots of tools that you can use that are in our blog post for this week and the PDF for this week. If you're looking for a partner class, I still think that Comments for Kids is really a nice, easy way to kind of get started. But if you want to go through a service, there are other services that can connect you to other classrooms that want to share and build an authentic audience. Hi, Maria. Hi, Reiko. Thank you guys for sharing and for coming in here today. Reiko has asked a question. A commenting rubric is a great idea. Any samples you can recommend? Yes, I have a sample, and I know, Reiko, you know the one from Coattail. That's the rubric that I would use with older students, and then I have some for kids that I can share a little bit later, and we will take all of my notes from today and put them into a wrap-up document. And so I will put some samples. Thank you for asking about that. I'll put some samples of commenting rubrics in there so you can see. Having said that, I highly recommend you develop the rubric with your kids, because they have seen tons of rubrics. They know what a rubric is. They don't need to be given a rubric for commenting. If you have that really great conversation with them about comments versus compliments, if you do the practice in your classroom with that Google Doc and they're replying on comments within the Google Doc, then they can build that rubric for themselves, and then it'll be really rich and valuable for them. So definitely happy to share samples so you can kind of see the kinds of things you might want to steer the conversation towards. I think that's probably the most important part there, but they can totally make that rubric for themselves. Okay, so I think I did my first three things, which are practicing, prioritizing conversation, and I talked about commenting within and beyond your classroom, and I've talked about the Google Doc. Now, I'm getting lost in my notes, but let me keep going here. So one thing I think that you can do with kids is talking about how they behave in online spaces, and maybe not just what they share, because I think they get a lot of messages about sharing thoughtfully and carefully, but how we react to what other people share. And I think that's something we don't always talk about with kids. And so one of the things I was thinking about that could be a great strategy for that is having kids write their own scenarios. And they can write scenarios about stuff that they've actually had happen to them with no names attached, and then talk about how would they respond if they saw this. And I'm thinking about all sorts of examples, thinking about a friend posting a picture of me where I don't like how I look. How would I have a conversation about that? Thinking about a time that I got a comment that made me feel bad. How would I respond to that? And kids are having those experiences all the time, but they're not necessarily talking about them with the adults in their lives, whether that's their teacher or their parent or an adult family member. So taking away the personal aspect of it and having kids write their own scenarios and then talk about how they might react in that sense, I think could be a really valuable way for them to reflect on the importance of engaging in meaningful dialogue, but also responding meaningfully when something happens to them. I was recently at the EarCoast Teachers Conference, and one of the sessions that was awesome was all about kids going through puberty and online, kind of in online spaces, like what it's like for them growing up today and being online and going through puberty. And one of the things she talked about was coming up with an agreement as a class, what they felt comfortable sharing. And so they agreed the kinds of things they were going to share as a class. And so I think it might be interesting to have students bring in their own personal examples if they can agree that that makes them feel that they're comfortable enough to do that. So providing a kind of safe space for kids to share not just scenarios, which names not attached, but their own personal examples of what's happening to them in online spaces and how they react. And in this particular EarCoast presentation, they made an agreement about what they would share, and they signed it, and they did all this pre-work to feel comfortable sharing these kinds of things in the classroom. Along the lines of just comments, Peggy says the video is spinning, but she can't see or hear. Can somebody else comment and let me know if they can see or hear me, or if I might need to restart my computer, which sometimes happens here. I'm going to keep talking until I see another comment, or then assume that perhaps no one can hear me and restart my computer on my own. I do want to say that I just wrote a blog post about dealing with digital confrontation, and that's kind of what got me interested in talking about this. And I know we've all had kind of those personal experiences. Chrissy says it's a little cutting out. Okay, and Maria can hear and see me. Okay, I'm going to keep going and hope that the recording turns out okay, and if anything is a little funky now, you guys can hear it later in the recording. I know we've all had personal experiences in online spaces where a conversation has not perhaps gone the way we wanted it to go, and how we react to that is a really kind of fascinating process, because as an adult, I feel like I don't always know what to do. And I'm a mature adult and I know how to react in face-to-face situations. I should be able to transfer those skills into digital spaces, and I can't always. So I think giving kids an opportunity to engage in conversations about potentially stressful online situations in a real and authentic manner is a really valuable way to help them figure that out and work that out. Oh, Peggy, I'm so sorry you can't. I'm going to write a comment right now. Okay, so sorry about that. Sorry, Peggy, that you can't hear. That's a really, oh, yeah, you're back. Okay, awesome. Excellent. So I realized that I have talked about 4 kind of big ideas here. I've talked about starting with a conversation about comments versus compliments, that T-chart and that comment sandwich. Giving kids opportunity to comment on shared reading within your classroom using that Google Docs strategy with the 3 levels of reading alone together, reading silently together, those kinds of things. And commenting beyond your classroom walls using Twitter and blogs, using comments for kids, and then discussing and reflecting on real life scenarios, whether it's the actual thing they kind of print out and bring to you from their own Instagram page, for example, or it's just a scenario they make up for themselves. And as I'm talking about that, I'm realizing that is actually just bullet number 1A on my little list here, and I've already been talking for 26 minutes. So I'm going to go through bullet number 1B and 1C, and maybe, I don't know if I should leave these for another time. You guys tell me if I should keep going or not. And I was worried about talking for 20 minutes. I should have known better. Okay, so kind of coming back to that concept of dealing with digital confrontation, my item number 1B is recognizing resilience on here. And I think that's the value of recovering from mistakes, because we have a tendency as teachers, and I am 100% guilty of this, of talking about think before you post, and your post is going to be up there and it's going to be up there forever, and if you make a mistake then it's horrible and the world will crumble, so make sure everything you put up there is perfect. Now that's obviously hyperbolic and exaggerated, but generally speaking I feel like the message that kids get is everything they post should be perfect, because it's so important that the online profile they create is this perfect version of themselves. However, the reality is we make mistakes online. I make mistakes online. I made a mistake this year online, and I have learned from making that mistake. So how can we help kids understand that actually, yeah, of course, it's important to be smart with what you share, but we can recover from our mistakes too. We can make mistakes and learn from those mistakes and be better next time. So I think the idea is, can we have conversations with kids about resilience in online spaces? Is there an opportunity to see examples of people failing and recovering from that failure? As an adult in their lives, can we, I guess, take a risk and show them potentially some failures that would be, age appropriate and appropriate to be sharing as a teacher, so that they understand that yes, it is possible to share something you regret later and recover from that mistake. I don't have a good strategy for that, because I think that really depends on how comfortable you are with sharing, but I think one easy way you could do that is actually my point number 1C on here, which is explore role models. So there are lots of people, famous people that your kids are following online that make mistakes all the time. And we can actually look at those kind of famous people as, people that are out there, they're not necessarily part of our immediate world, and how they made mistakes and recovered from those mistakes. I agree with you, Peggy, that they need to be real failure examples and not made up failure examples. And I think, generally speaking, there are lots of celebrities that we can look at and find genuine failure examples and see positive actions taken towards recovery from those mistakes. we can also see negative actions and actions that maybe didn't work out so well, and we can kind of almost study those as like a case study. Here's an example of a good recovery from a mistake. Here's someone demonstrating resilience and demonstrating what Peggy is talking about, the hope to continue going. And then there's examples where people maybe don't recover quite so well. And I'm just reading Maria's comment about practicing orally if they're giving plenty of opportunities to give and get feedback. That's an awesome way. So maybe we're not ready to look at some social media elements with really younger learners, but we can do it via conversation. Awesome. So my point 1.3 was exploring role models. So looking at examples of failure in online spaces and resilience. Understanding that, yes, we do want to prioritize thinking carefully before we hit that publish button, but actually sometimes we might make a mistake, and that's okay because we can recover from that mistake. So, to summarize again, talked about what you can do with students, practicing prioritizing conversations in the comments. We talked about recognizing resilience and learning how to recover from mistakes, and we talked about exploring role models. So those are all things you can do in your classroom with kids. The other thing I wanted to talk about, and this is maybe the part that I'm like super interested in, but I'm not going to talk about for too long because I recognize that time is running out, but things that you can do just as an adult, either as a parent in a child's life or as a teacher in another child's life, just an adult around kids who are learning to be in social spaces in the online world as opposed to the face-to-face world, the way that we grew up. And so, I just have maybe 3 points here, and they're not really as long and in-depth because they're not classroom strategies. But I think the first one here under 2, what you can do as an adult or a teacher or a parent, is value their spaces as legitimate places to socialize. I feel like I work with a lot of adults, teachers and non-teachers, and I feel like a lot of times I hear kids are spending too much time online and it's immediately devaluing what they're doing in those online spaces. I think a lot of times we forget that we've almost forced them into those spaces and then we kind of judge them for being there. What I mean is either our children, and happens in international schools particularly, I see this a lot, either our children are super overly scheduled. They have something going on every second of every day, a practice after school for a sport, and then they're playing an instrument, and then they're going to extra tutoring class, and then they have their homework, and they are literally never have any downtime because they are going from the moment they wake up to start school at 7 a.m. or whatever till the moment they go to bed at 10 p.m. They're scheduled every second, right? So then we complain that they want to hang out in social spaces. Well, that's because that's the only time they get to kind of relax and be with their friends because every other part of their day is scheduled. Or then you have another issue that can happen in international schools, but I think is a real issue, particularly right now in the US, is we can't send them out to play. Like maybe I did when I was a kid, we can't just kind of send them out and go play or go hang out at the mall or go hang out at your favorite local restaurant because just being really honest here, maybe it's not the safest place for kids to be unsupervised. So we don't have that kind of downtime with our friends that maybe I used to have when I was a kid. And because as adults, we didn't grow up with these social spaces as a space to kind of spend that downtime, we as adults may not value those spaces. Moral of the story is, what they're doing in social media spaces is the same kind of stuff I did when I was literally hanging out in the parking lot at my high school, like nothing fancy, just hanging out, learning how to be a kid, learning who I was as a person, learning how to become an adult with other people the same age, learning the same thing. They just don't have the parking lot at the back of the school to hang out at anymore, or the mall, or their favorite restaurant, or the playground. Now they're doing those things in social media spaces. So I think as an adult, one of the things we can really do is recognize that social media spaces are a valid place for our kids to be socializing, and recognize a little bit our responsibility in that happening. We've overscheduled, we've decided places aren't safe, we've kind of forced them into the corner, and now that's where they are. It doesn't necessarily mean it's bad, So what we talk about with parents all the time is just having a conversation. Who did you talk to? What were you talking about? What was interesting to you? What did you like? Just a conversation about what they're doing. The same way my mom would have a conversation with me when I would come home from high school, but 2 hours after school got out. She didn't know what I was doing. She wasn't watching me, but she would have a conversation with it, and I would tell her what I told her, because you're learning how to grow up, right? Along those lines, with number 2A, valuing their spaces, is 2B, which I think is really interesting and something I've shared quite a bit on social media, is that there are norms in those social media spaces the same way we have social norms in face-to-face environments. And they're developed the same way that we developed our social norms in our face-to-face environments, but they're developed specifically for online environments. So I've talked to lots of kids about this, and things I don't always expect. Like, I happened to talk to some students in Marysville, I think last year when I was there, and we were talking about how almost everybody is on Instagram, and Instagram is kind of the public space. Everybody's friends with everybody, but the rules are that you can be friends with everybody, but you don't post a picture of yourself 2 times in a row. It makes you look like you're self-absorbed, so you're really careful. You don't post more than, I forget, 1 photo a day. And they had all these like kind of organic norms that they had developed around Instagram in this one individual high school that everybody knew, and it was totally normal. The same way that I knew when I was in high school that you carried your backpack over 2 shoulders because that was the way you carried your backpack. Like, just social norms in social environments online, they get developed the same way they were developed when we did them, but we did them in face-to-face. And I have a couple of articles that I think are really interesting along these lines that I will share for you in the notes from today. You may have heard of them, so I'll just mention them briefly right now. Rules for Social Media Created by Kids from the New York Times. That one was primarily about Instagram. Like, Flirt, Ghost, A Journey into the Social Media Lives of Teens from Wired. That's one of my favorites. And then I have also one from Psychology Today called Teens Redefining Norms. Thank you, Peggy, about your invitation to this webinar. I will check that out. She has a webinar this Saturday about parenting in the digital age. Awesome, very cool. I do lots of parenting in the digital age stuff too, and we actually have a course for parents on parenting in the digital age that Chrissy and I have developed. It's really, really good. So I would love to hear about your webinar and see what I can learn from that. Fabulous. Okay, all right. I'm in 37 minutes in, and I'm on my last thing. Point number 2C is be a role model. And I think that goes right back to the last conversation, looking at resilience, looking at real world examples. If you are willing, and I understand many teachers are not willing to share their social lives online with their students, but if you're willing to even share part of that with them, I think it's really valuable for kids to see real life examples of people they know, not just celebrities, sharing their parts of their lives online, and like even having a conversation about how did you choose to share this and not that? How did you choose to respond to this and not that? I don't know how often our kids get to have authentic conversations with adults who kind of understand the repercussions of their actions and see what that looks like in an online space. So that's also one of the reasons I wrote that blog post dealing with digital confrontation. I have plenty of mistakes I've made. Some are maybe not appropriate to be sharing with a wider audience, but certainly with a small group of kids, I would be really comfortable showing my Facebook profile and talking about that in kind of an intimate setting. So I think if you have the opportunity, particularly as a non-teaching adult in a child's life, to have those conversations, it is really valuable for them to know that we're not perfect and we do make mistakes, and we do make mistakes in online spaces, and we can successfully recover from them. All right, so I know that was 40 minutes and I can't believe I talked that long, but I talked about everything. I got you in the classroom, what you can do with students, practicing prioritizing comments as conversation, recognizing resilience and the importance of learning from mistakes, and then exploring role models so we can see opportunities in learning from failure. And then as an adult, a teacher or a family member or anybody who's an adult in the life of a child, you can value their spaces too and understand that it's a valuable place for them to socialize. Understand that there are social media norms. There are norms in those spaces the same way there are face-to-face. And then maybe take a risk and be a bit of a role model in your social media sharing and share that with kids. And all of this I need to summarize, which I didn't say first, and I probably should have. This is not a one-off conversation. This is a conversation you have time and again. And anytime it comes up, it's something you can talk about with kids. So if there's an incident in your classroom, you can bring up all of these ideas with kids, context specific, so that they have the opportunity to kind of revisit this conversation over and over and over again. So thank you everyone for coming, particularly you guys have been commenting so much. I'm so honored. Thank you so much. And Reiko has asked a question. It's her first time joining Facebook Live. How do you find them? If you subscribe to Eduro Learning, like us, like our page, you'll get notified every time we have a Facebook Live session. And we also announce them. If you like our Twitter profile or Instagram profile, we post them there as well so that you can see every time they come up. Right now we're doing a Facebook Live every day, every 1 day a week, which is about around this time. Like next week it'll be the same time next week, and it'll be me and Jeff. And then the week after that it'll be just me again. So we're doing, for me, it's every Friday for the next couple of weeks. If you're in the US, it's every Thursday. And I'll show you the note one more time because I think Reiko wants to see it, but I'm going to post my own show notes so that you'll be able to see all the things that I talked about today. So thank you guys so much for coming. It was such a pleasure to chat with you, and look forward to seeing you guys again next week. Thank you very much.